All right, welcome to section 2 of Alex's Intro to Windows 2012. Exam 7410 materials, installing and configuring Windows Server 2012. This is the basic lab setup section, and let's set up a lab. Now, there are some requirements here. None of them matter. The only thing that matters is you need virtual threading to support multiple machines on one, and you need a 64-bit processor, obviously. 16 gig of memory, technically not necessary, although it's nice for later. Ditto the 750 gig of hard drive space. 500 is probably sufficient. You might even be able to get away with 250 for this exam. You can do this with Hyper-V, but to align with the videos exactly, you'll need to use ESXi. And if you're doing it in Hyper-V, the advantage is hardware, hardware compatibility, which is why we've got the white box ESXi for hardware ideas. I'm assuming that you might be building a lab or have something that's compatible already. And you're going to have to download VMware ESXi, which I'm assuming you can figure out how to do by going to vmware.com and signing up for a free account and getting ESXi and burning it, and ditto the 2012 server ISO. And then we can talk about networks. But before we do, I have already gotten VMware ESXi, and I have all of these lovely machines here that I'm going to power off, because I am going to delete all of these. Remove from inventory, and they're gone. So the first part of this is a bit of an explanation of vSphere. When you get the disk from vmware.com and you put in the now 5.1 version, it's really a next proposition. And at some point you'll put in a password, and with that password you'll go through the process and reboot. In this case, my IP is picked up as 192.168.1.13, and if you say 192.168.1.13, it takes you to the web page. And you can download the vSphere client from vmware.com. Once you've downloaded the client, you say VMware client, you put in the username, which is root, that you probably installed. Obviously, you'll want to change that at some point, with the password, and you get your lovely web page. I'm going to flip through a couple of things really quickly. You can see on the summary page, here's something about this machine. Here's what I got. Here's my capacity. No virtual machines anymore. No resource allocation. Not much in the way of performance. Data store is the thing that really kills me. And you can see at some point I was using memory for those 4 machines. And the active memory was actually really low because they were idle overnight. So this goes back to 5:40 this morning. It's now about 6:30. And configuration. So this is very important for the lab. Storage, you can right click and say browse the data store and refresh. Ooh, I meant to remove these from disk as well. The fun things that you do with virtualization. So I wanted to show the ISO folder and that I've actually uploaded the Windows 8 RTM evaluation disk into this folder. So let's talk about networking. This is a lab. The lab's going to be on its own switch. Let's remove this just to get you back to a normal space. In Hyper-V, they have what's called a private network, which is just for things on the machine. In VMware, these are all just virtual switches, and there's some specification for what they get used for. You'll see this VM kernel is if you're using vSphere, vMotion, iSCSI, NFS, and host management. I'm going to create a lab.internal switch. No reason to have it just be lab. And that brings up its own switch. The reason for this to be its own switch is because I do not want these machines talking to the outside world. They're inside my eggshell, so to speak. So DC11. I'm just running through and choosing the typical defaults for Windows Server 2012. And this is going to be DC11, where I'm going to use a 10.0.0. Whatever this number is scheme. And you'll see that this thing's creating the machine. And if I chose something other than thin format for the disk, it's probably the formatting of that that's taking a while. So that is the first virtual machine. And now we're going to install an operating system on it. Play. So now it's turning on. You can see that down here. And it's not at BIOS yet. Here we go. CD-ROM drive. Connect to ISO image. Data store 1. ISO folder. Here's my image. Control-Alt insert is what you use instead of Control-Alt end in Microsoft. And this is going to start running. I'm going to switch to the slideshow for a moment. I'm not going to switch to the slideshow for a moment. I'm going to click Next because we want to get this machine up and running. And I'm going to talk about the other components of this lab. So really you got to talk about networks and what is a network. You're talking about the reason that computer networks came to be instead of everyone having their own little island of disconnected information is really about file sharing and printing. And DNS and DHCP are a way for computers that are on some sort of IP scheme to talk to each other. DNS is sort of like a Yellow Pages. DHCP is if you have a rental office situation where you walk into a building every day and get a new cubicle with a phone. DHCP is sort of like the concierge who tells you you're going to this office with this phone, plug in here. And so clients would be the workstations, and file sharing and printing are the functions that everyone needed originally, although now you've got the internet, and that's amazingly important as well. Going back to our first server, I'm going to do a data center install with the GUI. Punch next. I accept the license. Next. Now, since there's nothing on here, it really doesn't matter. For the exam, you'll have to know what your upgrade options are, because you can only upgrade from 64-bit systems, and I believe you have to upgrade from Windows 2008 x64 Service Pack 2 or Windows 2008 R2. You'll notice when I attempted to do the upgrade install on this machine that doesn't have an operating system, it was very not happy with me. So here I am, and I will be doing a custom install now. And I'm not doing anything fancy. So this is now installing, and this is going to take a while. We'll come back to check on it. As I said, I've got one hard drive in my lab. Having two or maybe even an SSD or two would be wonderful, but I don't. If I was going to seriously upgrade this, I'd have to consider whether I was buying some sort of SAN unit or buying a couple of SSDs to stick in to assign directly to a file server using some sort of pass-through. Alright, so IP schemes. In your house, if you're someone who's at home studying and thinking about doing some sort of certification, you probably have an IP scheme from your internet provider with some sort of network address translation box that gives you a publicly addressable IP address belonging to your ISP. And inside you get a bunch of 192.168.1 type addresses. When you're in an office, it's basically the same thing. Demo 2, the introduction to ESXi, I guess I really should have gone over that. And you'll notice I've got the Hyper-V integration services here replaced with VMware tools. Hyper-V integration services. Just to review ESXi again. Virtualization, including Hyper-V, lets you make a basically fake computer inside of a real computer and lets you have several fake computers for your real hardware. Now, if you look at this particular machine, hit the Summary tab, you'll see I've got 6 CPUs at 3 gigahertz each. Now, there are a lot of organizations that have servers that maybe have 1 or 2 CPU cores at a gigahertz or a gigahertz and a half, and the machine was upgraded to the next version of Windows if you're lucky, and it's still kind of creeping along because it works. As long as you have good backups and you're willing to deal with downtime, that's fine, and that's fine for a lot of businesses. However, that sort of machine would take 1 CPU core of this box, and the maximum memory you can address with 32 gig is 3 gig. So really, you could put 6 of those boxes and this one ESXi box. You might be a little bit constrained by memory, but if you've got some old legacy stuff that's been hanging around for political reasons, and maybe it got upgraded from something to something else, but it still doesn't really have any use, it's a good candidate for virtualization. So let's check on this. 53% getting ready files ready. Let's go back to a lovely description of what we're going to do. So we created a virtual machine, we turned it on, we said Control-Alt-Insert works in VMware, whereas Control-Alt-N works in Hyper-V. And the first servers we're going to create, there's the one we already started, which is Active Directory and DNS. The second server is DHCP, WSUS, and Windows Deployment Services. And the third one's going to be NAT. Why is this? Because these features, along with a file and print server, get you a server from several years ago. Or not a server from several years ago, and a small office from a few years back. That you have Active Directory, which keeps track of user objects and synchronizes them so you can use the same username and password and security objects and credentials against resources to validate your security. Domain naming system translates IP addresses into something that's usable by humans, and it's required for Active Directory because there are a bunch of service records that go in DNS that are required for Active Directory to run. DHCP is Dynamic Host Control Protocol, and that allows a computer that has come up on a random network to request an IP address from some server on the network and get an IP address. Now, Windows, Vista, and Up will also register themselves in DNS once they get the DNS server from the DHCP server. But older versions of Windows will not. And it's considered bad practice to have DHCP on your Active Directory domain controller if the DHCP server provides the A records in DNS for the clients that it gives leases to, which is one of the options. So either you don't have the DHCP server create A records in DNS, or you don't put your DHCP server on DNS. I was just in an environment where they still had Windows 2000 servers, which is just a really bad idea. And this feature of DHCP registering in DNS is required. Windows software update services is essentially Microsoft saying patch. You've all been to Windows Update. This allows Windows Update to be offloaded to one server on your network, so your clients can go and talk to that server for updates rather than all going out across the internet and talking to Microsoft and jamming your internet connection. Windows Deployment Services is not really required for the exam. It's definitely one of the things that they can ask you about, and it's mentioned on that list of 100 items. But I find that it's good for deploying servers because I don't really want to pay attention and I don't want to have to mount the CD to the drive. And obviously network address translation, I could do this with Linux or BSD, and there's a good argument to be made as to the efficiency of it. However, that's not really a good thing if you're studying for the Microsoft exam. So let's take a look at this machine again. 90% installed. Alright, and I'm stuck in the window because I clicked in. I don't have any software integration services. So we're going to install and configure Active Directory Active Directory Domain Naming System, Dynamic Host Control Protocol Services, Windows Deployment Services, and then we're going to bootstrap those facilities to deploy the network address translation server, or if you like, the routing server. Here's my first comment. Minimum requirements are a minimum, and you don't really want to use them in the real world. The minimum requirements for Server 2012 is a 1.4 gigahertz processor, not 2.4, 1.4, 512 megabit of memory, and 32 gigabit of drive space. This is only suitable for a lab environment, which is convenient because that's really what we have. So minimum requirements are a minimum. You don't want to use minimums in the real world. Would you put the minimum amount of gas in your car to drive 2 states away, or 100 miles into nowhere? Because if you're a little bit short at that gas station, or get stuck with a little bit of server load to carry, that could affect your mileage. So Active Directory is a lightweight directory access protocol-based directory system that allows for users, groups, and computers and organizational units to be kept in a multi-master database. Also, you want to enable the recycle bin. If you have the option into going into the recycle bin and selecting an object that was deleted, say the organizational unit that has all of your users in it, that is a much preferred method than using ntds utils to take the Active Directory database offline, do a authoritative restore of that section, which you have to find, which you don't know where it is because you don't have the deleted items, the recycle bin turned on, and you have to go searching through security logs, if you can find them, to say where things were. So this domain controller is still coming up. It's a little bit slow. Or not. I've got a black screen. Since I still have a black screen, I'm going to continue through here. Active Directory. The next thing we're discussing is DHCP. In order to be able to discuss DHCP, you've got to be able to discuss IPv4 and IPv6. Because a lot of organizations aren't using IPv6 yet, you can still get away with only knowing IPv4 for the most part. So, Internet Protocol addresses, it gives every computer an address that can be reached by other computers. Some of the addresses are actually reserved, like 10 dot whatever or 192 dot etc. And you've got this dotted decimal notation, which is a representation of the 8 bits in each of the 4 octets of an IP address. Now, you also have a subnet mask, which divides some part of this address into network parts and some part of this address into node parts. So you might have a big company and you have 123.124 as actually 123.124 as your IP address, and then you could have a whole bunch of subnets underneath that. And most companies aren't using that many addresses. On the other hand, there's a lot of small companies who can't get IPv4 addresses, so they've now gone to IPv6, or at least they're trying to. And rather than 32 bits, there's a 64-bit address. And the really important part of this is the subnet mask matters for the DHCP server. A /24 subnet mask means this part is got 2s all the way across it, and this has got 2s all the way across it, and this part's got 2s all the way across it, and this part is left for nodes. Now, it's 254 addresses because it's 2 to the 8 minus 2. Why is it 2 to the 8 minus 2? Because all zeros or all ones for your bits represents a broadcast. Now, going back over here to our first server, I'm putting in a password. And it's thinking about doing something. So let's log into it. First thing you'll notice is Server Manager comes up and it looks a little bit different than it used to. Now I'm going to go over to my lovely virtual machine and say new virtual machine. DHCP 12. Why DHCP 12? Because that's going to be my addressing scheme. And apparently this server is going to have 2 NICs. So here we have our first server. You can see there's a fair amount of stuff here already. File and storage services. Oh, while we're at it, I'm disconnecting the disk, not that I need to, because I want to install integration services. In this case, it's called VMware Tools. And we're going to run this setup 64. So the integration services give you things like heartbeat between the host and the child. And it also gives you drivers that are optimized for the virtual hardware that you have. It's really just a driver optimization pack with some added widgets, being things like taking time off of your host. Is it good to take time off your host? It depends on the scenario. There are some things that have happened in the past that would say yes, and some things that would say no. So, integration tools, I'm not restarting. So you'll see here we're under the File and Storage Services control panel on the left-hand side of Server Manager. And there is only one volume on this machine. Wrong, two volumes. There's a 350 meg out-of-box experience kind of section. I think it's out-of-the-box experience. That's the boot drive as opposed to the system drive. There's one disk on this machine. It's a MBR disk. Wonder why it chose to do it that way. And there are no storage pools, and there's not even a unformed pool because this machine does not have any disks. You'll notice the IP address is assigned by DHCP. Let's change that. And when we install Active Directory, it will complain that we do not have a static address for IPv6. I don't want to type it in. Reservation would be better. So 10.0.0.11, 255.255.255.0, 10.0.0.1. And for the preferred DNS server, 127.0.0.1. Why is I doing that? Because if I was to change it to this machine by IP address, it will get changed in the process of installing Active Directory. So I'm going to change the computer name. Computer name is going to be DC11. There is no domain yet, so I can't give it a domain. And now I'm going to have to reboot. Let's take a look at what our other machine is doing. Absolutely nothing. Open, power on. We're going to need to get the disk on this. Give it a second to come on. I think the other one's rebooting at the same time, so I'm kind of starting to pull on the disk. And you can see the memory's dropped. Oh, that's off the cliff when I started this video. So see the memory dropped down here, what was actually consumed. Oops, active. And I've got a second machine on, so that's come on. Oops, clicked in the window. Control escape to get out. Connecting this to a ISO image. And you can send a Control-Alt-Delete to the virtual machine to restart it from the image. So this is going to start booting now. See, it's loading files. So we have here our first virtual machine. Can't do anything, can't talk to anything. It's on its own isolated network with this one other box, and it can't get infected by anything as a result. So I'm going to stop this video here and come back and show you where we go from here.